Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, Sarvas Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. In the first section of the chapter 13 that we are studying, we saw last time the function of three essential attributes of the material universe. In Sanskrit, they are called gunas. Another meaning for the word guna is a rope which binds. So the same word means not only the attributes of nature, but also that which binds us to the material universe. We also saw that these attributes are essentially of three types. They are called sattva, rajas, and tamas. We saw their essential characteristics as well. How sattva is that calming force within us, the force which manifests knowledge, the force that manifests divinity. Anything that is essential for our spiritual growth, that is what sattva represents. Rajas is that attribute of nature which essentially is behind the activity, all activity, physical and mental. Anything that makes us want to do things, makes us want to achieve things in life. And tamas is generally described as a force of inertia, that which holds us down, that which makes us do things thoughtlessly. So all thoughtless, reckless actions which produce a lot of destruction, those are attributed to tamas. So the last verse which we saw was verse number 9. Let me read the translation. Sattva binds one to happiness, rajas binds one to work, while tamas, by covering knowledge, binds a person to inadvertence, etc. So today we begin with verse number 10. So let's chant together. Rajas tamas chabhibhuya sattvam bhavati bharata. Rajas sattvam tamaschaiva. Tamas sattvam rajas tatha. Sattva manifests, O descendant of Bharata, overpowering rajas and tamas. Rajas manifests, overpowering sattva and tamas. And likewise, tamas manifests, overpowering sattva and rajas. Now, every one of us has all of these three attributes within us. And because of that, we find these changes occurring in our lives. Not only at different stages in our life, but sometimes just in the course of a day. Sometimes we feel very active, we feel very energetic. There are times in the day when we feel lethargic. There are times when we feel confused, puzzled. There are times when we feel calm and peaceful. Now, why do these changes occur in our lives? And of course, from perspective of neuroscience, they might just say it's because of certain chemical changes that are occurring in the brain. From the perspective of the Vedantic psychology, they speak about these three, the varying proportions with which these three characteristics occur, sattva, rajas and tamas. That is when these changes occur within us. So whichever of these three is dominating, that is the characteristic that will manifest in our lives. It will kind of hold in check the other two. So when we feel kind of drowsy, lethargic, confused, that's when tamas is so strong, so overpowering, that the rajas and sattva are kind of a little suppressed, and so on. So that's how, although we have these three in varying proportions, it's not a fixed quantity. It's a very dynamic equilibrium they have. So they keep on, their proportion and their intensity and their manifestation keeps on changing throughout the day. Now, over time, we might find that one of these might tend to dominate more than others. It's a little bit like we simultaneously have several levels of identities. So for instance, at the same time, the same person is a father, a son, a husband, or a woman, a wife, a daughter, same time, but as related to different people. Similarly, the same person can be from a political identity, could be a Democrat or a Republican. If he's a sports enthusiast, could be a Red Sox fan or a Yankees fan, and so on. Now, and it's possible to juggle all these identities one after the other. Now, we might find that if someone is, let's say, a political junkie, now such a person might, the identity that I'm a Democrat or a Republican, that might come up more often in the course of a day than the other identities. So while other identities are present, one dominates. Exactly in the same way, all of these three, rajas, tamas and sattva, are present in us, but over time we might discover that one of these three may predominate. And that which predominates, those are the effects of that dominance of that one of the three gunas will show through the way we think, through the way we do our things, through the way we relate to our work and to the people around us. Verse number 11. The next few verses will describe the specific characteristics of these three gunas. Sarvadvareshu dehesmin prakasha upajayate jnanam yada tada vidyat vivriddham sattvamityuta. When through all the sense openings in this body, the light of knowledge radiates, then indeed one should know that sattva predominates. The Sanskrit here is sarva dvara. Dvara literally means a door. Now, it's through our senses that all the sensory input is received. So the knowledge of the world comes to us through the senses. The knowledge itself doesn't come, it sounds very technical, sensory data is received through the senses. And then, of course, it gets interpreted by the mind and the intellect, and what results is knowledge. So how do I know that this thing exists before me? It was because this information that this object is here comes to me through the sense of perception. And that's how the knowledge of this entity comes. That's why it is said, through the sense openings in this body, the light of knowledge radiates. Now, not every, well, we might have a general knowledge. For instance now, of course, if my eyes are in working condition, I look at it and I know that, well, this entity exists. But I might have more specific knowledge. What is this object called? What is it made up of? And further, some deeper insight. So the basic knowledge that comes to us through the senses is the knowledge of existence, that something exists. And it doesn't have to be only the eyes, of course. It could be sound, it could be a sense of touch. But the first is it exists. And then, of course, what is it that exists? And more information about it. Now, all of this knowledge that comes, that is what sattva does. So, function of sattva is to produce knowledge. And knowledge comes through the senses. And there will be times when sometimes we are so dull or lethargic that sometimes you might see, if you're so exhausted or just plain bored, you might be sitting in front of a television set or have a book in front of you, but still nothing is going inside, nothing is registering. And that's when we can see my senses are functioning, but sattva is down. That's when no knowledge is being produced. So whenever there is knowledge, we have to know that that is what sattva is doing. Verse number 12. Lobha pravrittirarambha karmanam rajasye tani jayante vivruddhe bharatarshabha. Greed, activity, undertaking of works, restlessness, desire, these prevail, or best of the Bharatas, when Rajas predominates. So what happens? If Rajas is the guna that is dominating my consciousness, then these are the kind of things happen. The experience of greed, whenever we feel greedy, whenever we feel, oh, I need this, I want this, or anything that, and these are all kind of connected. It's usually among the different things that can push us into activity. Greed is one of the major ones. I feel greedy for something, and the next thing I do, I must do something to acquire whatever it is that I am greedy for. So greed leads to activity. And of course, activity means undertaking of work. You have to begin the work sometime. So sometime you will see, we might want to do something, but we may not even begin doing it. So the initial push, it's a little bit like when, and I've seen that happen so often in my case, so something similar may have happened in your life also, is that you understand the need for, say, a daily exercise, a daily walk. And we might have noticed that there are times when you just feel, I just don't feel like going out and walking. Or it's like, oh, if I could, I'll better finish some other work that I have instead of just going out for a walk. So you might know the need for a walk, you might want to do it and yet not do it. But once you kind of push yourself to do it, first that beginning, undertaking that work, and once you kind of go out, then you might really enjoy it. You might even walk a lot. But sometimes that initial push to do something, that's also is a result of Rajas. So Rajas is necessary not only to undertake any work, but to kind of give us that initial push, that initial, as they say, I think it's, if I remember my high school physics a little bit, I think it's called limiting friction. That is, when an object is at rest, the force you need to make it move, to set it in motion, is more from the state of rest than in motion. Once it's in motion, then it's a little bit less. I mean, there is still friction, but the limiting friction when it's at stationary is much more than when it's in motion. Just that's essentially the thing, that when we are kind of stationary, when tamas is which kind of wants to keep us in one place. So initially you need that push by rajas to make us move. That's what this undertaking of works means. Restlessness, of course. When you want something and you're trying to achieve it, unless and until you achieve whatever it is that you are wanting, you cannot be at rest. And so restlessness is a natural outcome. And desire, of course. Desire is another thing that pushes us, that whatever we desire. So I don't know how this works, whether it's desire that produces greed or greed that produces desire. You work it out. But both of these things are manifestations of rajas. So all of these, greed, activity, undertaking of work, restlessness, desire. So when rajas predominates in our consciousness, these things are present. In other words, whenever we find any of these things happening in our lives, the students of Vedanta will know, right now, rajas is predominating. Now, in itself, rajas is not necessarily bad or good. We're not saying that this is good or this is bad. This is just recognizing which attribute is active. Verse 13. Aprakasho pravrittischa pramado moha evacha tamasyetani jayante vivruddhe kuru nandana. Now what happens when tamas predominates? Darkness, inactivity, inadvertence, as also delusion. These prevail or descendant of Kurus when tamas predominates. Darkness, not physical darkness of course, it's darkness of ignorance. Inactivity, inadvertence. The Sanskrit word here is inadvertent means pramada. Pramada means the kind of errors we do when our brain is not working well. When we are just feeling lazy, there's a lot of inertia inside, there's a lot of confusion, there's a kind of a dullness. And in that state of mind, we do things that should not be done, and we don't do things that should be done. Now that is what is called pramada. And that's been translated here as inadvertence. And moha as also delusion. Of course, and one of the ways we could describe delusion is just really even dreams. Because a dream conjures before us a world which is, we could say at least from our present experience, is an imagination. Compared to this, our dreams are an imagination. And so we kind of, as long as we are in the dream, we don't know it's a dream. We know it's a dream only when we wake up. So we could say from our waking perspective that we are completely deluded. I'm still lying in my bed, and yet in my dream I may be in Bahamas and thinking I'm in Bahamas. So that is clearly a state of delusion. And that's not the only delusion we can have clearly. But it's a kind of a one very, very clear case of delusion from our waking perspective. Now all of these are manifestations that occur when tamas predominates. So a state of sleep is a state of tamas. So sometimes based on this understanding, if you have seen crocodiles, we used to say that they're extremely tamasic animals. Part of the reason is they're just so huge and heavy. And in Madras, in southern India, where I was for many years, there's a place called Crocodile Bank. And it's in the very distant suburbs of Madras city, where literally thousands of crocodiles. It's just only crocodiles. And people go to see. It's a place for visitors to go and see.
And what is fascinating, especially these big ones, sometimes you'll just see that they're just there, they're not even moving. Unless you look carefully, you wouldn't even know that they're there. And oftentimes they just kind of, their color merges with the environment. So you just have to look very clearly. Of course, they are all in, they're surrounded by a wall, so you're safe. But what's interesting was this, some of them just open their mouth and it just remains open for hours together. It's not like, okay, there's nothing to eat, they'll close it. No, it's like it's open and they'll probably just wait for a few hours until something goes in. So just looking at that, we used to say, well, they are extremely tamasic. It's too much of a work to even close the open mouth. So these are the characteristics when tamas predominates. Now what would happen? Now, as I said, all these three gunas, they are always fluctuating. Over time, depending on the kind of discipline or lack of it in our lives, we will find that one or the other of these will be predominating, dominating, will tend to be uppermost most of the time. And one day we are going to die. Surprise, surprise. And so now the question is, what would be at the time of death, which of these gunas will be most predominant? Sometimes, as the Gita itself will mention later on, that, and it's also been emphasized in other Vedanta texts, that if we remember God at that last moment we are thinking of God, we will attain the highest. That's what some of these books mention. And then someone said, well, if I'm going to attain God by just remembering God at that last moment, why should I spend my whole life trying to repeat God's name so many times? And if I'm just going to forget it at the last moment, it's been pretty useless doing all that earlier. On the other hand, let me just not bother about all this stuff. Let me just be alert that when it's moment to die, I'll just remember God and problem is solved. And then, of course, the answer given to that kind of reasoning is that if we have not practiced earlier in life the remembrance of God through prayer, through japa, through meditation, then that last moment, the thought of God will not even come to us. It'll be very difficult if our mind is not trained to do so. Sometime you will see, and I'll tell you one instance that occurred. This happened probably some 4 or 5 years ago. Whenever there is a need at the Mass General Hospital, especially if there is some Hindu patients dying and then they request for a religious person to be present, they call me and I often go and say a prayer. And so I got a call from Mass General requesting that one of the patients is very serious and the family had requested if someone can come and help them with the prayer and things like that. So I go there, and after I went, went to that floor. I was waiting at the nurse's station, and for a long time, I waited for 10-15 minutes. And then I was wondering what happened. They called me, and I've gone there. Then I think it was one woman who was very, very on her deathbed. And then her husband came out and was very grateful that I had gone. And he said, could you just wait? I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. Could you just wait for a few minutes? And then her son came, and they were so apologetic because they had gone and told the patient that a monk had come to say something, and she just went ballistic. She was just, because it was like, well, that means I'm going to die. Because I was like, why else would you bring someone? And the idea that someone has come and some prayers could be said, that this would be a time to remember God, it was so terrifying. And this is just one kind of a very obvious example. But there are other cases I have seen when I have gone and said prayers, and the family is praying, but the patient is not at all thinking of God. You might chant, you might do everything. So I mention all this to show that if earlier on in life, if our mind is not trained or has had some practice thinking about God, at the time of death, even if everyone around your bed is trying to remind you of God, your mind will refuse to be there. And so all of this japa and everything that we do is so that at that last moment, my mind would naturally, effortlessly be able to think of. We don't know how that last moment is going to be. We don't know how conscious we will be. We don't know how much in pain we will be at that time. We don't know. None of us knows. And so if our mind is trained to think of God constantly, that's why that in Orthodox Church there is this thing, pray unceasingly. If you read that book, The Way of a Pilgrim, and again also in Holy Mother's teachings, etc., we say, remember God always. Ramakrishna says, remember. Then we say, why always? Because if my mind is naturally able to think of God effortlessly, spontaneously, without too much effort on my part, in fact with no effort on my part, then at that last moment, no matter whatever condition I may be in, my mind, just because of the prior training, will automatically think of God. And that's really, it's what makes the difference. That is what these verses will do now. What happens, which guna will be dominating at that last moment of my life? So verse 14. Yada sattve pravruddhetu pralayam yati deha bhrit tadotamavidam lokan amalan pratipadyate. If the embodied self meets with death when sattva is predominant, then it attains the pure spheres of the worshippers of the highest deities. Nothing very complicated, although it might sound like that. Pure spheres of the worshippers of the highest deities. Put in plain language, what it means is this. We read in the books that our passage after death depends on the kind of karma that we have accumulated. And the books also describe different layers of existence, different spheres. Sometimes they are called lokas. Lokas are sometimes just translated as, sometimes people translate it as heavens. It really doesn't matter how you translate it. The celestial worlds, heavens, and so on. The Sanskrit word loka, if you go to the etymology of the word, simply means a place where people experience the results of karma. That's all that the word loka really means. Although these lokas may have different names. And among the different names, among these different lokas, just like you have a 3-star hotel, a 4-star, and 5-star. So the human mind is kind of programmed to create categories, to make hierarchies, and so on. And so clearly, it would make sense, depending on the kind of karma we have done, that we go to different places. Although we may say, well, good karma will take, in a broad way we will say, well, good karma will take you to heaven, bad karma will take you to hell. But even among goodness, there are gradations of goodness. It would be unfair, at least people who have been extremely good and people who have been just more or less good. If they find themselves in the same place, then those extremely good are like, that's not fair. We were more good than them. Remember, those who are going there are the same people, all of us. Since this is how we think here, we are not going to think any differently there. So that's essentially the reasons why there are many different heavens are described. There's a story. It seems that one person wanted to go somewhere by bus. And when he went to buy a ticket, they asked him, you want a first class, a second class, or a third class? And he had never heard, even traveling by bus, there will be these different classes. And so he had some money and he said, I'll travel first class. And he bought, which obviously a more expensive ticket. But when he actually boarded the bus, he found everything was identical. All the seats are identical and he was furious. He said, you guys said there is first class, second class, third class. I paid so much and I find there is no difference at all. And then they said, just wait for a while, you'll understand. So he said, okay. So they all sat and then the bus started. So after about 1 hour, they heard some sound and there was a breakdown. The bus came to a halt. And then the driver announced, he said, those who have got first class tickets, keep sitting. The second class and third class, please get down from the bus. And those who have a third class ticket, please push the bus. So we know that depending on the kind of amount of good and the kind of good you have done, it makes sense to have different kinds of heavens. Now, all this is to show just how human mind, who knows what kind of heavens are there? All that we have is books and the different stories that the books tell. And it seems credible because we know how people think. And we know that these are the same people, at least some of these people are going to go there. So it sounds like a credible thing. In any case, if at all there are these different kinds of worlds after death, then the highest world, like the 5-star, the topmost place to go, it's called Brahmaloka. And so where it is said here, the pure spheres of the worshippers of the highest deities, simply understand by that this goes to some very high, the best of heavens, if you like. So if sattva is most predominant at the time of death, you will go to a very good place. That's the essential meaning. Verse 15. Rajasi pralayam gatva karma sangishu jayate tatha pralinas tamasi mudha yonishu jayate. If it meets with death when rajas is predominant, then it is born amongst those who are attached to work. Likewise, if it meets with death when tamas is predominant, then it is born in the wombs of irrational species. The translation is interesting. So again, what it simply means is this. If at that last moment, rajas is predominant, then those who are attached to work is normally understood that you are again born as a human being. So if you want to come back as a human being, develop a lot of rajas. Wombs of irrational species, it's a kind of very literal translation, is understood to mean you're born as animals. Any other, again, this is a very human-centric perception of the universe. The idea that the evolutionary ladder, the human beings are at the top and others are irrational, which can be questioned. In fact, there's a lot of recent studies have shown that the idea that animals don't or can't think, or that children don't or can't think is a pretty outdated version now. And so it's good to recognize. Oftentimes in books, in religious texts, there is a tendency to put human beings on top and all other creatures below. But recognize this is the philosophy written by human beings. So we don't know a dog's Vedanta. if a philosopher dog would probably put a dog at the top of the link. So it's natural. Swami Vivekananda says that even when you think about God, our God is a very human God. Because that's just the way our human mind can think of that divine being. So Swami Vivekananda says that if a cat were to think about God, a cat's God would be an infinite, huge, loving cat who provides a lot of rats and mice to all the good rats. Again, I just mentioned this to show that we must recognize that all of our philosophy, all of our understanding of life is from the perspective of human beings. And so when it says about irrational species, it's often described as subhuman, and which would include not just animals, even plants, because plants have life too. This will do one more verse. Verse 16. Karmana sukritasyahuhu satvikam nirmalam phalam rajasastu phalam dukkham ajnanam tamasah phalam. The result of virtuous action is said to be sattvic and pure. The result of rajas is pain, while ignorance is the result of tamas. The result of rajas is pain because rajas is what prompts us to action. And action will always lead to results. So karma will lead to the fruits of karma. And fruits of karma, even though fruits of karma could be either, in terms of experience, either joy or sorrow, they both are described here as pain. Now, sorrow can be painful. Why would joy be painful? One way of understanding this is this, that there are two kinds of sorrows in life. One kind of sorrow is what we are all familiar with, and we are to deal with it on a daily basis. The sorrow caused by homelessness, through poverty, through hunger, through betrayal, through separation. All of these causes which we are dealing with on a daily basis, they produce sorrow and pain, no doubt about it. But this is not a universal form of sorrow in the sense that not everyone in the world is homeless. Not everyone goes hungry. So while this is real, this affects a good number of people, but we cannot say that everyone is subjected to it. But there is another kind of sorrow from which no one is exempt. And I sometimes like to call it existential sorrow, not connected with the existential philosophy itself, but in a more literal sense. Sorrow connected with our very existence as human beings. Just by the fact that we are living beings, we are subject to this sorrow. And Krishna refers to that in the Gita as well. The reality of birth, death, the process of aging, sickness, now that's no one is exempt. East, west, north, south, wherever a person may be, wherever any living being may be, not just human beings, even animals, any living being has to go through this process. If there is birth, there's going to be death. And that's not no fun. The process of aging, we cannot stop the process of aging. And aging has its own aches and pains. Illness, no matter how much organic food you eat, no one can say that they have never fallen ill. the body is a defective product. It's not perfect. It's going to break down sooner or later. You can mend it, but it's open to breaking down. Similarly, the limitation of the mind that we have. The mind is a great instrument, but it's limited. It's prone to stress, anxiety, worry. The limitation of the intellect. We can know wonderful things through the intellect, but we cannot know everything. So the limitations of body, mind, intellect, from which no one is exempt, this sorrow is truly universal. Because just by the fact that we are existing as human beings, it's connected with our very existence. That is what is referred to here as pain. That is what made Buddha refer to the life itself as suffering. That is what makes Krishna refer to Gita in this world as a joyless world. Because if you don't look at the context, these statements would appear either wrong or extremely pessimistic. But Buddha didn't say, oh, life is joy and suffering. Buddha said, life is suffering. Life, this sorrow is the reality. Now, they were referring to this existential sorrow. Now, just as there is existential sorrow, there is existential joy. A joy which is inseparable from our existence as the spirit, as the Atman. So, as long as we identify with the body and mind, which are defective in themselves, we cannot separate ourselves from pain. The moment we are able to identify with the spirit, we cannot separate ourselves from joy. Because the joy, Satchit Ananda, that Ananda is the characteristic of the Atman. And so the way to become happy in a real sense of the term is not pursuing this or that, because it's still activity, it's still going to lead to the result of karma, and going to have joy and sorrow. We are still stuck in that circle. And that is what is meant by the result of rajas is pain, while ignorance is a result of tamas. Now, of course, we are already in ignorance. What tamas will do is kind of put us into greater ignorance. Ramakrishna gives the example of, he says that fish in a river, because he lived on the bank of the river Ganges, this is something he saw on a daily basis. The fishermen would throw a net to catch fish, and then Ramakrishna describes the different kinds of fish. And he said there are certain fish who are very smart, who manage never to get caught in the net. There are some others who get caught in the net and struggle to get free. But there are some others who are caught in the net, but who just kind of bury their heads deep down and think, oh, we are just fine. Everything is fine. So that's what is really meant by this ignorance being the result of tamas. That is, you're already caught, but you're either in denial that you are bound, or you don't even know that you are bound. So these are the results of the sattva, rajas, and tamas. We've seen what would happen depending on which of these is predominant at the time of death. So we'll stop here today, and next time we will begin with verse number 17. Do you have any thoughts, ideas, questions? Yeah, Tom?
Maharaj, how do you remove tamas from the Maharaj, how do you remove tamas from the mind?
Swami Vivekananda often said that the way to deal with tamas is to push yourself to rajas. So rajas can be very helpful. So if lethargy, inaction, I'm overcome by that, I must push myself into activity. And so oftentimes it is said that tamas is to be overcome by rajas, and then if you purify the rajas, if you direct the activity towards a spiritual goal, then rajas itself that purified rajas can take me towards sattva. So that would be a good way to do it. It's one more thing needs to be kept in mind. Sometimes just as they say, the extremes look alike. In some respects, tamas and sattva are in the two ends of the spectrum. And some of the things externally might look same. I mean, how are you to know if someone is just kind of lying in kind of just lethargic stupor, or someone is in samadhi? Externally, both are inactive, both are motionless. And so, sometimes you will see when you're feeling extremely drowsy or sleepy, you're not feeling restless that time. In fact, you're just feeling a pretty calm. Sometimes you're just kind of not fully asleep, just kind of thing, and you're not worried at all, because even worrying about something needs effort, needs some activity. So in that kind of a total dullness, a kind of calmness, or at least the semblance of calmness is experienced in that dull this thing. Now, if I'm so stupid that I might think, I'm in some kind of a spiritual trance because I'm experiencing this deep inner peace. So that's where delusion also comes in tamas, that not recognizing tamas as tamas, but mistaking it in fact for sattva. Yeah, Mandira?
So, Swamiji, can you please explain a little bit about how rajas and karma yoga might be related? Because karma yoga is activity.
Yes.
Activity.
Yeah, good. So, rajas is something that is inbuilt because none of us can live without working. And so, rajas is good. Where we do have freedom is how to do the work. So, doing work is something we cannot get away from. But where we do apply is, karma yoga would mean that I do work, as Swami Vivekananda said, either doing work for work's sake. In other words, doing good because it is good to do good, doing right because it is right to do what is right, with no expectation of any kind, without desiring the fruits of work. That would be karma yoga. Or doing work out of love for God, offering the fruits to God. If I do that, I mean, that's still activity, but that's what I meant earlier when I said purifying that rajas. So purifying that rajasic activity would be directing it towards a spiritual goal and doing it in a spiritual way as a yoga. Then that kind of work will not bind me. But doing work with things like I'm doing work, then that's a problem. Yeah. Steve? Yeah.
Swami, the Gita praises. Sorry. Swami, the Gita praises sattva to the skies, but at the same time, it also says that sattva binds through attachment to happiness. So I guess the question I want to ask you is, what's the problem with being attached to happiness?
Yes, good, very good question. Any kind of attachment is bad. If at all we must be attached to something, we have to be attached to something which will detach us from everything else. And so you will remember Ramakrishna's story about the three thieves. That while sattva will help me free from the clutches of rajas and tamas, sattva also is one of the gunas. There is a stage beyond which sattva cannot take me. So attachment to happiness becomes an obstacle. To give you one example, for instance, say sometimes when we are meditating, and there's some day you really feel wonderful. You are enjoying the meditation. You're really feeling happy while meditating. And when you become aware that, and you just feel, today I'm so lucky. Today I'm meditating, it's so wonderful. So that's that attachment for happiness, the happiness that you are experiencing at the time of meditation. Once you become aware of it, your meditation has really stopped. That stopped because you have been caught by that happiness. So that kind of a thing becomes an obstacle. And so a courageous thing would be, even if this happiness comes, say in this specific example, you remain focused on God, not get sidetracked. In fact, this is called one of the obstacles in it's often called rasa aswadanam, tasting the bliss. This is an obstacle. So the bliss of meditation, tasting it while you are meditating, is an obstacle. So attachment to happiness becomes an obstacle that way. Yeah. Yeah.
Swamiji, you mentioned about that incident when death was close and that patient was kind of afraid to even take the God's name because it's associated with sadness. My question is that we think about God or remember God when we are either in the sad way we are going or something in trouble. Why is that? Number one question is why we associate God with that. And second is that, correct me if I'm wrong, we think of God when we are in trouble because we are nothing other than God. So we kind of come to us and close to us. So is that a way we think of God because when we're in trouble, we come to us?
I think thinking of God when we are in trouble is not a problem. Not thinking of God when we are not in trouble, that's the problem. You see, I think probably all parents have probably experienced it, that when children grow up and they become teenagers more usually, and then most teenagers don't want their parents around them. They want to kind of keep them away. But still, these children haven't become independent yet. So whenever they are in need of something, that's when they'll run to their parents. And when everything is fine, and they don't want parents to be just kind of hovering around them. They just want to kind of keep them away. I think it's the same psychology we carry over to spiritual life. So what happens is when everything is going fine in life, actually thinking of God is actually a problem. Then people might find that I really cannot just go out and enjoy whatever the way I understand the word enjoy is because if I'm always thinking, oh my God, is this right or wrong? This would be good for my spiritual life or not? Now that seems like an obstacle to my just going out and having fun. And so people don't want to think of God because God is not a very pleasant presence when nothing is wrong. And so we tend to think of God as more like a spiritual 911. Nobody calls up a hospital when everything is fine. It's a little bit like that. So the thing is, if I recognize I think the problem lies here, that we are sensitive enough to know when we are in trouble to seek God's help. But our sensitivity is very limited. If my sensitivity increases, if I become truly spiritually sensitive, I will realize that I'm always in trouble. There is never a time I'm not in trouble. As long as I am subject to the demands of the body and mind, so long as I have identified with this thing I call me, I am in trouble. But most people don't think that way. And that's the reason people don't think of God all the time. Because otherwise, if I know I'm in trouble, I will naturally go to that being who can take me out of the trouble. So the trick is first, it's like this. When will you want to solve a problem? In order to solve a problem, first of all, you must first accept there is a problem. If I'm either not aware of the problem or I don't accept it, there is no question of solving it. That's the idea. Anything? Okay, so we will stop here, and when we meet next week, we will begin with verse number 17. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu. We bow down to Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother. Today, by the way, according to the Indian calendar, today is the birthday of Sri Shankaracharya. So we are for all these insights. Of course, the Gita, the Shankaracharya was the first person to write a commentary on the Gita. Gita is merely 700 verses, buried in some 100,000 verses of this big epic called Mahabharata. And it was Shankara's genius who was able to take this tremendous philosophical work from within the body of that larger book and comment on it. And it's only after him that other schools of thought came and then they commented on it. So as we remember him today, and that is why on this Sunday, a topic will be the story of Shankara. We'll be able to reflect a little bit on his life and teachings on Sunday. Next Wednesday, we'll continue with the study of the Gita. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. Let's conclude with a prayer on page 3 of your books. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.